aspect, and if you look at where the percentage, given the percentage of people you had in Vietnam, and if you look at the accomplishments of many of them, and of course many of them you don't even know that they're Vietnam vets. Look at the movie industry. Look at you know, not only the business world, the political world, what have you. So they've done it very well. Of course, you wouldn't know that because, given the nature of that war and what was going on in this country, and as divisive as it was, and you know, the unjust thing, of course, as I've always said, is that the Vietnam vet was portrayed negatively by the media in many respects for quite a while, and that was really unjust. They did what they were asked to do. We lost what, 52,000 of them over that period of time. No, they were a very a group that just basically really were as patriotic and really answered the call, and so they're another great generation.
What was the worst moment at the Hanoi Hilton?
Tell me which one.
You can't.
There were many.
You were, I imagine, tortured and beaten. And
oh yeah, torture was something that most of us went through it.
What is torture?
Torture was, to me.
No, what was torture? Well, I mean, if they came in and tortured you, what did they do?
Well, they did many things. Anything from deprivation of sleep for weeks, and food, or just basically water, constant beating, to force means that inflict a great amount of pain, leave scars on you. There was not just the whippings and the beatings, but the means they would go to obtain, mostly for us, propaganda, and to obtain information on, you know, in terms of our organization, covert activities, and what have you. Torture was, albeit on the brink of death and coming back from it, and a lot of guys did not come back from it.
They killed a lot of
They
GIs.
killed a number of them, yeah, through torture. And most of us, you know, it's all subjective, that you resist as hard as you can, but then you for propaganda or one reason or another, you sort of, okay, give them a little bit now, so you can come back and fight again next day, and the next day until they give up, or either they give up or you don't make it.
Did you have survival will to the?
Oh, definitely. Everybody wants to survive. Everybody, but you know, sometimes it's just too much for the body, and it broke the spirit, broke the minds, people.
How do you feel about the Vietnamese people? Do you hold bitterness?
No, you know what? I don't have bitterness. I think that basically we used to have a saying while we were there. And we always used to say, you know, someday we're going to go home, but these poor people have to stay here. You know, talk about the guards and other people that worked in the prison camps. Now there were some bad dudes. There were some bad guys. Some of the officers that inflicted the torture and the punishment. Those you don't give a hoot for them. But if you look at the population in general, as a peasant population, very industrious, by the way. But living in that society and living in those conditions that they lived for, they had to stay there. We were much better off because we were coming home to, you know, it's the greatest place in the world.
To a garage with a carpet in it.
No, that's my wife. She doesn't want to get anything.
Everett, you have a garage with a carpet.
That's my wife's deal. Can you believe it? Then she has to pay somebody to clean the carpet.
When you were in the Hanoi Hilton in 1966, did you ever think you'd come home to a carpeted garage?
I wish I had a carpet, though. I could have slept on that. It would have been a lot easier.
Listen, you've been a gentleman. You're a great American. I appreciate you letting me come into your home and speak with you tonight. It's been an honor.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Very nice. They had me within a half hour. I was captured.
And then immediately, how did they treat you? What happened?
Well, they didn't quite know what to make of me. And I didn't quite know what was going to happen to me. So it was very interesting. And counter. I thought they were going to kill me because they did shoot at me before they got me, and
So
they
they,
didn't. And
would
I
they
was
tie you up?
surprised. Oh, I was tied up like a top,
Right.
like a wound up top. You know, took my shoes off, my boots off, everything, and then they basically carried me from. Once they got back on land, I was carried and placed in and blindfolded. And from then on, everywhere I went, I was blindfolded.
And you were the very first
Yeah, I was the very first pilot shot down over the North Vietnam,
pilot shot down.
August 5. So in history, it's known as the Tonkin Gulf incident.
How long would it be before now? Okay, so when was the first time you were stationed? I assume they moved you around the first few days?
Yeah, they moved me and put me in a local prison for a couple of days, and they put me in a local farm outside. They were hiding me. And I think they were probably hiding me more from the local people than anybody else, because there was a lot of inquisitive people always looking in the cell windows or whatever they could see. But yeah, and then it took about a week after that's when they first took me to Hanoi, and then I was the first occupant of that low prison. We called it the Hanoi Hilton later on.
You were the first. You were the first American.
First American occupant.
So
yeah, it was a prison with both men and women, and that was full.
So your first night there, were you put in general population, or did you have your own cell?
Oh no, I had my own cell. They kept me apart. They kept all of us later on when others showed up. They kept us apart from the Vietnamese.
And how long would it be between the night you were shot down until there was first contact with the U.S.?
Oh gosh, the first contact with the U.S. Next time I talked to an American, over 15 months. Yeah.
And who was that?
Well, they finally, in September of 65, they took me and put me in a Jeep, and there were others in a Jeep truck. And then, but I did make contact with the first one. I did make contact was a fellow named Larry Garino. He was an Air Force pilot, and Larry had, I think it was about the 12th or 13th person shot down. But by that time, when they put me in contact, there were about 20, total of 20 fellows captured. And that's when they took us to another camp out in the countryside, and we stayed there for a couple of weeks. And they brought us back to another prison in Hanoi.
How long were you a prisoner?
How long was I in prison? I was in total of 8.5 years from the time I was shot down to the time that we were released in '73.
Did you ever think you were going to get out?
Oh, there were times definitely when.
And was there hope?
But you know, our job was to hang together and support each other and do what we had to do to keep each other going, even if we were in solitary. You know, we learned how to communicate, developed a system to communicate, and tapping on the wall. We really had that. It was a covert means of communicating, because the camp commander did not allow anybody to communicate. So he did it. We did a pretty good job of communicating through the walls and keeping each other's spirits up and kept each other going. And it was tough the first few years, but then as more and more Americans were shot down, and they finally had to put us in groups of 2 or 3 in a cell, and that's what it was until 1970 when they started putting us in larger groups.
Were you in the same, was Senator McCain in
I
your?
was in the same camp at the end, but I was never in the same cell with John McCain. No.
Did you know who he was while you were there?
Oh yeah, we knew everybody that was in the camp. We had a very good system of communicating. We knew everybody who was in one or other camp.
Do you and Mr. McCain have a relationship at all?
What do you mean?
Do you speak to John? I mean, have you spoken to him since you left that?
Oh yeah, we've talked a lot. Oh yeah, John, when he was a congressman, and I was a deputy, political appointee, deputy of the VA. We communicated a lot ever since. Yeah, we've been pretty good. He calls me his good friend or his best friend. You know, John, everybody's his best friend.
But that has to be
He's been a friend.
that has to be a special relationship, though. I
Well,
mean,
it definitely is. It's a bond. It's a bond there. You've gone through similar experiences, like a fraternity.
right.
Yeah, there a lot of the guys are, you know, still close, very close, and
Is there a day that goes by that you don't think about this?
oh, many days. Only when people like you show up, ask questions. About 10 o'clock that morning, the phone rang, and they basically said, you know, get down here. You got a plan for a flight. You're going on a mission. And it turns out there were 10 of us from our squadron, 10 A4s, who were assigned targets way up in the northern part of North Vietnam along the coast. And so I got up, I got dressed and put on my flight suit, went down to the intelligence center on the ship where we were planning our flights. And it was about 11 o'clock as we were planning our flight. Now, we had been going through many exercises previous to this time, but it turns out we were always canceled or always, for one reason or another, never really launched on. And these were flights that were supposed to be over the south of Vietnam. But we really, we were used to the exercise of planning, get ready, and sometimes get in the cockpit and then things would be canceled. Well, this was different. This was the first time we were going into North Vietnam. And about 11 o'clock, the air group commander walks in as we're planning our route.
What was his name?
And his name was Commander Edge, Don Edge. He was the air group commander. And he basically said, this time it's a go, guys, it's a go. He said, President Johnson just got on TV back in Washington and announced to the country that we're doing this. And however, what happened is that here it was 11 a.m. local time on the ship, but there's a 12-hour difference. We're halfway around the world, so it was 11 p.m. here in Washington when Lyndon Johnson got on television because he wanted to get the American public before they went to bed. And it turns out that the planes from another ship that was in the area, the Ticonderoga, actually launched and struck their targets about 11:30, and they had launched their planes before we launched ours. We didn't launch ours till 2 p.m., which was about 3 hours later, and then we didn't hit our target till about 2 hours after that. So the Vietnamese had about 5 hours notice that we were coming. Of course, we had bombed, the other planes from the other ship had bombed the targets along the southern part of North Vietnam. And so
you're off the
by
ship.
the
Tell me,
time we got up there and we finish our briefing, I go up and get a bite to eat in the dining mess room, in the officers' mess.
you remember what you had?
I had scrambled eggs, potatoes, and incidentally, I was looking forward to coming back because it was a Wednesday, and Wednesday night was roast beef night. So I was looking forward to getting back and then having a roast beef dinner. We had to fly at altitude all the way, so I mean they saw us coming. They could see us coming on the radar. And finally, when we caught sight of land, we let down gradually, and then I was flying wing on the XO, the executive officer of the squadron, and the rest of the planes in my flight dropped back because we weren't sure where the target boats, and the target was Vietnamese naval torpedo boats. And so we knew where the base was, but we didn't know where the ships were going to be located. And then when we went in, the XO and I went in, we saw the ships in a row, about 5 torpedo boats, and we called it out. I fired my salvo, but the XO didn't fire his, and as we pulled around, the whole world opened up on us. And we called it out, so as we pulled away, and their AAA was tracking us, and burst all over the place. The other planes came in and hit their targets and pretty well wiped out all six, 5 or 6 of those torpedo boats. And then when they pulled out, the XO went back in to fire his, and I had already fired mine, but I went back with him, and I just basically had my 16 millimeter guns, and so I used that. I was just sticking with my wing, my leader, and that's when I got shot down. Is when I pulling out of that.
Where'd you get shot?
I got shot right on the coast, right on the coast.
So was
And
it?
as everything started to explode, and the plane was smoking like crazy, and the fire alarm, everything, every emergency indicator came on, and I knew when the stick froze and I couldn't control the plane, and it started to nose over, but just did a slow roll, started to nose over, and I couldn't control it. I knew I had to get out. And being at a very low altitude, because we were just pulling away from.
What's low? 1,000 feet? 2,000 feet?
Oh no, I was hitting the treetops.
You're kidding.
And I pulled up. I managed to get the nose up bit before it started to roll over, so I actually ejected, going sideways. I wouldn't have cleared the ground, but right in that area they have these high cliffs, and the trajectory it took me, and it went right over the cliff, and down below is the water, and my chute popped, and as soon as my chute popped, I hit the water. So I was very lucky, because had I ejected a second before, 2 seconds before, I wouldn't have cleared the cliff. The very first time we had a feeling that it was going to be over was when Nixon resumed the bombing. And they started the bombing, and I believe it was Linebacker 2. This was in the fall of 1972. And, the bombing, we knew that we were serious about ending the war because of the intensity of the bombing. And it was, the B-52s at night coming over and dropping their weaponry. And by Christmas...
Could you hear that?
Oh, I was in the middle of it.
No.
We were sitting there watching all the SAMs go off every night until there weren't any more SAMs to fire. And the guys they kept bombing it up. And you could tell that the North Vietnamese were demoralized. The guards would groan. They didn't even bother to go man their AAA. You could hear, voices out around the prison within the city. And then when it finally quit after Christmas of '72, we knew that was it. And of course, we knew the peace talks had been going on in Paris for a number of years, and so we figured this was it. When the bombing did not resume, then we knew that it wouldn't be that long. And a couple of weeks later, we had. By that time, they had taken a lot of them and spread them back out around different areas. They had taken a group, or almost most of the prisoners, to a large camp up on the China border. And I guess to prevent any more rescue attempts like they had at Sante in 1970. And so, guys, next thing we know, one night here comes a bunch of guys back, marching into camp, middle of the night. Guys we hadn't seen for years. The Vietnamese started to arrange us in different cells, and we looked around, and we were by the first one shot down in one cell, and then followed by another group. So we knew that they were getting ready to do something. Then they announced the end of the war. The peace treaty had been signed, and of course they came out and announced it. It was anticlimactic because it had taken so long. And then soon afterwards, when they called us out and issued us clothing and told us the next day we'd be going home.
And how did that transpire? They take you to a plane?
Pardon me?
They take you to an airplane?
Yeah, the next day they lined us up, by order of shoot down, and plus the wounded that were, on stretchers, and we marched out of the camp, out of the prison there, and loaded into buses, and then the buses and Of course, this is the first time we'd travel anywhere without being blindfolded and shackled. And so it felt differently. And we drove through the city and over to the airport where the American planes were lined up.
What kind of plane was it?
Well, the C-141 is the one that took us home, but they had other planes there, cargo type planes that carried equipment, men.
So you
They were
said,
part of the party.
so you got on that plane.
Got on the plane.
When that plane rose in the air, when the
Then I knew it was when we had wheels up. Then I knew that we were really going home. Up until then, you become rather cynical, because there have been so many times where you thought you were going to come home and only to have your to be deflated, get your hopes crushed and what have you. But this time, once we were on the plane, actually airborne, was when I figured, okay, this is really it.
and how long
And
was
I
that?
turned to Bob Shoemaker and I said, "This is it, Bob. We're on our way home." Because I knew we weren't going to go back and land for any reason by that time.
And how long was that flight, and where did that flight land?
I don't recall exactly. It must have been about a 2-hour flight, because it landed in Clark Air Force Base in the Philippines.
And who greeted you?
Thousands of people were there. Media all over the place.
Emotional?
Emotional, yeah. It was. It's hard. By this time, it was hard to get emotional. It was hard to really get. I never cried until I saw one of the fellows in my squadron that I actually felt tears. But by that time, you become so, I guess, hardened in a way, and so it was emotional. It was exciting, and I think that's probably today, looking back on the events and perhaps seeing movies, that you become a little emotional, but it was just going through the process for me.
And when did you first get back to the States?
Let's see, we left Hanoi on February 12th. We arrived at Clark on that day. It was about 4 or 5 days later that I flew from Clark to the States.
Did you know that man had landed on the moon?
We knew that man had landed on the moon only because we were able to filter the camp propaganda, the radio that they would broadcast. If you filtered through the propaganda and you could pick out little things here and there, you could actually get an idea of what really was going on.
But the Vietnamese weren't going to tell you, were they?
No, they weren't going to tell us. But in there, I remember distinctly that one of the broadcasters, a woman who used to broadcast to the GIs in the South Vietnam, and then they were talking about the usual propaganda and ranting about the U.S. and this and that. And what was interesting, she said it was something to the effect that a country as rich and powerful as the United States, that can land a man on the moon, can't even feed its own people, with people without shoes and going hungry and unemployed. And we said, "Did you hear that?" She said, we landed a man on the moon. And so that's how we knew.
Wow. And I guess you had 8.5 years back pay, right?
No. No, I was married before.
Oh, I see. So your wife got the checks.
She, the one, and then she got the check. Yeah, she made out pretty well. She left. She was remarried by the time I got home.
You're a funny guy. Tell me about your book.
With all my money too, by the way.
Yeah, tell me about your book.
Well, that's not important, I guess. The book.
You're kidding about the wife, right?
No, I'm not. No.
No, wait a minute. Hold on.
No.
This is your second wife.
Yeah, she's my, yeah.
Wait a minute. Hold on, Everett.
No, this is,
See, I thought you were joking.
well, it was true. It was true.
Wait a minute. So your wife, hold on. This is not the wife.
See, I don't talk about this.
Okay.
It was in the book.
Okay.
But
We'll talk about it
but
now.
I don't talk about anymore. This is something that you just shut off
Okay.
out of the past, and you don't want to do it. But I make a joke.
So
out of
she
it.
did-
I'll talk in public.
She didn't wait for
She
you.
didn't wait. She took off, and she and this other guy enjoyed what I had.
Whew. Okay, tell me
Anyway,
about
so
the book.
so the book
When did that come out?
basically came out in 1988,
Okay.
and it was took 2 years.
Huh?
I worked with an author, a co-writer,
Ghostwriter. Uh-huh.
Anthony Pitch. It was a very interesting experience. First time I'd ever tried to do a book. First time I even thought about it, and got into it. And so basically, Chained Eagle is a story of the captivity of 8.5 years. A little bit about coming home. A few inserts about growing up.
Did you get a publish? Was it published by a big publishing house or?
It was published by a New York publishing house, Donald I. Fine, who he was a fine person, well known in the publishing industry. He passed away as soon as right after it came out. He passed away a couple of years later, and it sold over 35,000 copies. The first
First run.
run of hard copies. Dell had the paperback rights, and then when this first run was over, we issued the rights to another Potomac press, and they're the ones that now, if you order the book, they're the ones that do the distribution.
I think there's a movie here, Everett. I think there's a movie.
Well, that's been an interesting story. Between you and me, this fellow, Anthony Pitch, he screwed it up every time.
Yeah. That happens. Let me ask you the juxtaposition. You're obviously a wildly successful guy. You live in this beautiful, beautiful home in Maryland. You're living the American dream. You came back.
Juxtaposition, okay.
You came back and you became. It seems like you got right back into it, and you're, and how are you changed? Because in meeting you, I would not know that you had this. I can't even imagine this horrific experience. I spent the night at the Days Inn last night. It was, to me, it was the worst thing that could ever possibly happen. And I'm a typical.
The last time I had a bad experience was at the Days Inn in Bangkok. I didn't sleep all night. I know what you mean. Yeah.
But how did you? I listen to these. Every kid who comes back from Afghanistan has PTSD. They're all on Ritalin. Everybody needs drugs, and it was something else I wanted to ask you too. Before you answer that question, let me just digress for a second. You had said something about, and I told you that I had a completely different take on Vietnam since meeting you in the last couple of weeks and going through the POW MIA leagues, and I realized that you guys were as noble as all of the World War II guys. And then you had said something about that they were the greatest fighting force. Could you repeat what you were talking to me about?
Well, you said that the World War II generation, the greatest generation, and you said that the Vietnam, you felt the Vietnam era veterans, the guys who fought in Vietnam, were just as noble and just as great. And I agreed with you, as well as the Korean veterans and others since then. But I also mentioned that the Vietnam veterans were probably more accomplished than the World War II veterans. And the fact is that out of all the World War II veterans who used the quote the GI Bill to educate themselves, prior to World War II, comparatively few number of people went to college. It was the GI Bill that really gave a lot of the guys, middle class Americans, the ability to go to college, and the whole country really prospered as a result. A great deal as the result of that ability to educate a generation of people and go on to bigger and better things. Almost about 49% of all eligible World War II veterans used the GI Bill, which is significant. But when you look at the Vietnam era veterans, it was over 60% that used the GI Bill to further themselves and what have you. So for